It was a warm Saturday afternoon, a typical quiet day in our suburban neighborhood, but that's when it all started. I'll never forget the sick feeling that crept up my spine the moment I walked outside and saw the caretaker's shed door locked, bolted from the outside. My heart dropped, and for a split second, time seemed to stop. I could hear Dylan's 8-year-old son inside, his muffled cries echoing through the thin wooden walls. My wife, Jenny, was beside me, her face pale with fear. She called out to him, but when he didn't respond right away, the panic in me deepened. You see, Dylan is autistic. The world around him can be overwhelming. Unexpected noises, sudden changes, unfamiliar space. It all sends him spiraling into chaos. So, when I heard his voice, the sound of distress rising as if he was trapped and couldn't get out, it felt like the floor beneath me was giving way. I rushed over to the door and tried to turn the handle, yanking it desperately. It wouldn't budge. The small crowd of neighbors had started to gather by then, drawn by Dylan's cries. But nobody knew what to do. Some of them looked concerned, but no one stepped forward. And then, like clockwork, she appeared, Karen, the new HOA president, striding toward us with a smug, self-assured glare on her face, her arms folded across her chest like she was dealing with some minor inconvenience. I'd never liked her. I had no tolerance for her attitude from the start. She made it her mission to enforce every single rule in the book, without any grace or understanding. No exceptions. No mercy. Karen had a history of picking on anyone who didn't adhere to her narrow view of what was proper. She'd scold kids for playing too close to the flowers, issue fines for pet owners whose dogs dared to sniff the rose bushes, and if your trash cans were left on the curb for a minute too long, watch out. But what she did this time, that crossed a line I couldn't even fathom. I marched up to her, my teeth clenched, my fists tight at my sides. The only thing that mattered to me was getting Dylan out of that shed, making sure he was safe. But Karen stood there, smirking, like she had all the power in the world. She shrugged her shoulders and said it, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Don't look at me like that. Your son was running around the gardens, disturbing the peace. So, I locked him in there to calm him down. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. The audacity of her words made my blood run cold. My wife started trembling beside me, gripping my arm for support. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but she held it together. I wasn't sure how much longer I could. I yanked at the shed's handle, pulling with all my might, but it wouldn't open. Dylan's cries from inside grew louder, his panicky widened in every breath. The way he was sounding, the way he was losing control, I knew he was getting desperate. Open it. Right now, I shouted, fury pouring out of me. But Karen just shrugged again. When he learns to behave, she said, coldly, then maybe I'll consider letting him out. We have rules here, and I'm tired of him rummaging around the community property. I could hear Dylan's cries, his sobs turning into frantic, terrified screams. Every second he was trapped in there was a second too long. My mind raced at could hurt himself. The darkness in there would overwhelm him. The noise of the gardening tool, she wasn't coordinated enough to stay calm in a space like that. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. She was punishing him because he didn't fit into her perfect little world. My wife was beside herself. She started to plead with Karen, her voice shaking, but Karen's response was cold and dismissive. Mind your own business, she snapped, turning her back to us, her eyes narrowing. This is between me and these so-called parents who can't keep their kid under control. That's when a couple of neighbors started to take action. Beatrice, usually quiet and reserved, gasped, trying to intervene. Karen, she pleaded, you can't just lock a child away like that. He could suffocate in there. But Karen scowled at her, eyes hard, and snapped, mind your business. At that moment, the desperation in me reached a breaking point. I could feel my whole body shaking, fighting the urge to grab the key from Karen's hand and open the door myself. But I knew if I escalated this confrontation, if I made it worse, it would just give Karen more ammunition to destroy us. I took a deep breath, forced myself to sound calmer, though the anger was bubbling beneath the surface. Look, my son is autistic, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He doesn't understand your rules the way you do. He's not hurting anyone by exploring the gardens. Just let him out. But Karen, she wouldn't listen. I'm tired of excuses. A child who can't follow instructions doesn't belong in a well-regulated community like ours. This place has standards. My wife's hand clenched my arm as I watched her face crumble, tears streaming down. Dylan's cries kept getting louder, more frantic. It was like she couldn't even see how wrong she was. At that point, our neighbor Tyler dialed 911, quietly explaining the situation to the operator. Karen, she saw him on the phone and rolled her eyes. "Go ahead," she sneered. "Call whoever you want. By the time the police get here, your son will have learned to stay where he belongs." Her words echoed in my head. I wanted to shout, to scream at her for being so heartless, but I held it together. Tyler kept his phone to his ear, and in a few moments, I could hear the sirens in the distance. When the police arrived, it was like the tension snapped. Officers Ramos and Janice stepped out of the car, looking confused, scanning the crowd, and then at Karen, standing there with the key. Officer Ramos spoke first, his voice calm but stern. "What's going on here?" My voice was tight with fear, but I managed to say, "My son's locked inside. He's autistic and terrified." Without missing a beat, Karen stood there, tossing her hair, and said, "It's an HOA matter. He was trespassing, so I secured him for his own safety." Officer Ramos blinked, clearly confused, and then he responded, "That's not how these situations are handled. You have no right to confine him like that." Karen, though, she wasn't backing down. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association," she said, a self-righteous look crossing her face. "We are allowed to protect community assets." It was like a slap in the face. And that's when Janice, the younger officer, looked at her partner. Without a word, they moved in. "Ma'am," Janice said sharply, "that's considered false imprisonment. If you don't open the door, we'll be forced to take action." But Karen refused. She stood there, her hands gripping the key like it was a weapon, as if she could still control everything around her. And then something unexpected happened. The officers' radios crackled, a quick update coming through. Their expressions changed. "Ma'am," Officer Ramos said, turning back to Karen, "open the shed now, or we're forcing entry." Still, Karen hesitated, staring at the officers like she was in Weinstein. But in that moment, the situation took another turn. The sirens grew louder, and something even more surreal happened. Army tanks started rumbling down the street. I could hardly believe my eyes as they pulled into our quiet cul-de-sac, their massive bodies dwarfing everything around them. Apparently, someone had called in a hostage situation, thinking Dylan was in real danger, and the dispatcher escalated it to this absurd degree. The crowd gasped. It was like a scene out of a movie, quiet suburban street overshadowed by tanks. Soldiers hopped out, looking confused. Officer Ramos quickly spoke to one of them, but even I could feel the absurdity of the situation. "Do you see what this is?" I whispered to my wife, who stared in disbelief. This is what it took to make Karen see the gravity of what she did. Eventually, the military personnel realized there was no need for such a drastic response. They apologized and pulled away, leaving behind a strange silence. But for me, the moment wasn't over. Dylan, terrified beyond belief, was finally released from the shed, but the trauma of what happened would stick with him for much longer. The next few days were a blur. Dylan's fear turned into nightmares. We sought counseling for him, hoping he could start healing. And as time went on, we began attending the emergency HOA meeting. It was there that the community, despite their shock, began to stand up for us. By the end of that meeting, Karen had been removed from her position. She faced charges for false imprisonment and child endangerment, but honestly, it didn't bring me any satisfaction. It was a relief, yes, but it was small in comparison to what Dylan had endured. As for the community, things changed. We introduced new guidelines, ensuring no one would ever abuse their power like Karen had. And in the end, we helped create a sensory garden in the neighborhood, a peaceful space for kids like Dylan to feel safe again. But we still couldn't erase the past. Some days, when I see Dylan's smile return more brightly than before, I feel proud of him, of our family, and of our neighbors for standing with us. And when I think about Karen's departure, I'm reminded that people like her can't keep the good ones down for long. What do you think? What would you have done if you had seen something like this happening in your neighborhood? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's time to talk about accountability, standing up for what's right, and making sure this doesn't happen again.